8:34 in the morning. That's the exact moment the ground broke open beneath western Colombia this week, and less than an hour later, a magnitude 5.0 aftershock hit the exact same region while rescue crews were still figuring out what they were dealing with. This is one of the most destructive earthquakes to hit South America in years, and I'm going to walk y'all through this chronologically, hour by hour, region by region, so you understand exactly how this disaster unfolded and where things stand right now. Today is Tuesday, August 11th, and I want to build this update around the actual timeline of events, because I think that's the clearest way to understand a disaster of this scale. The earthquake struck at about 8:34 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday, August 10th, with its epicenter located in San Jose del Palmar, a rural community in Chaco province, roughly 250 miles west of Bogota, according to the U.S. Geological Survey and its Colombian counterpart. More precisely, the USGS placed the epicenter about 5 kilometers or 3 miles east of San Jose del Palmar itself. Less than an hour after the main shock, a magnitude 5.0 aftershock struck the same general area. By Tuesday morning, nearly 100 aftershocks had already been recorded since the initial rupture, a sequence that has kept both rescue crews and residents on edge as the search and recovery effort continues. Let's talk numbers, because they've been climbing steadily since the moment this earthquake struck, and I want to walk y'all through how those figures evolved over the first 24 to 36 hours, because it illustrates how quickly the scale of a disaster like this becomes clear. Early initial reports on Monday put the death toll in the tens. Within hours, that number had climbed into the hundreds. One of the earliest widely reported updates put the toll at 111 confirmed deaths, with Pereira's mayor, Mauricio Salazar, telling local radio that at least 18 people had died in his city alone, and that many more remained trapped under what he described as a massive quantity of collapsed buildings. By Monday evening, the Colombian Association of Capital Cities updated the confirmed toll to at least 132 dead and 570 injured, including 60 deaths specifically in Pereira. By Tuesday morning, that figure had risen again to at least 169 confirmed dead. As of the most recent figures available, the death toll stands at a minimum of 224 people, with more than 200 injured and more than 3,700 people still reported missing across the country. I want to be direct with y'all. Given the pattern of these updates, it is very likely this number continues to rise as search and rescue operations continue, and as communication is restored to more isolated, harder-hit communities. Now, let's break down the geography of this disaster, because the damage is spread across a genuinely wide stretch of western Colombia rather than being confined to a single city. The hardest hit cities include Pereira, Cali, Quibdó, Manizales, and Armenia, all of which have been placed under red alert, the country's highest level disaster classification. Officials have confirmed 86 buildings have collapsed across the affected region, and 7 airports have suspended operations entirely. In Cali, Colombia's third largest city, located in the Valle del Cauca region, at least 27 deaths have been reported in that region, and the city's mayor reported at least 188 people missing in Cali alone. In the Risaralda region, home to Pereira, at least 40 deaths have been reported. The quake was strong enough to trigger evacuations as far away as Bogota, with witnesses there and even as far as the coastal city of Barranquilla reporting they felt the shaking, along with reports of shaking felt across the border into Ecuador. USGS estimated that approximately 10.5 million people experienced strong to very strong shaking as a result of this earthquake. Let's talk about specific incidents that illustrate what this disaster actually looked like on the ground, because individual accounts help put the scale of this in perspective. In Pereira, 16 people were trapped for 6 hours inside an aerial cable car system used for public transit across the hilly city before rescue crews were able to evacuate them safely. Video geolocated and verified by CNN showed the moment several buildings in Pereira actually collapsed during the earthquake itself, capturing the structures coming down in real time as the shaking intensified. One social media content creator who happened to be live streaming from the Pereira airport as the quake struck described the terrifying scene of crouching under a table while parts of the ceiling fell, and said that afterward, walking across the city on foot took him 2 hours, during which he described encountering injured people who were bleeding, screaming, and unable to reach their families because cell phone networks had no signal. Now let's get into the tectonic setting driving this disaster, because understanding the geology helps explain both why this earthquake happened and why this particular region of Colombia has such a well-documented history of destructive seismic activity. Colombia sits along a genuinely complex tectonic boundary zone, where the Nazca oceanic plate is being subducted, meaning forced underneath the South American continental plate along the Pacific margin. That subduction process is the same underlying mechanism responsible for both the volcanic activity and the significant seismic hazard that runs the length of the Andes mountain range through South America and the specific area affected by this week's earthquake, stretching from Chaco through the Risaralda and Valle del Cauca regions and into Colombia's economically vital coffee growing zone, sits close enough to these active fault systems to have experienced repeated, significant earthquakes throughout the country's modern history. This is not the first time this exact region has faced a catastrophic earthquake, and the historical parallel is worth understanding in detail. The area hit by this week's earthquake is part of what's known as Colombia's Coffee Axis, a mountainous, economically important region that was also the site of a major earthquake back in 1999, which killed nearly 1,200 people. That 1999 earthquake, centered near Armenia, one of the same cities affected again this week, remains one of the deadliest natural disasters in modern Colombian history, and it prompted significant reforms to the country's building codes and disaster response infrastructure in the years that followed. The scale of collapse being reported this week suggests that, despite those reforms, significant vulnerability remains across the region's older building stock, a pattern that unfortunately repeats in seismically active regions worldwide, where the pace of retrofitting existing structures often lags behind the adoption of updated seismic codes for new construction. Let's cover the official response, because government and emergency management action has moved quickly given the scale of what's being dealt with. Colombia's government has declared a national emergency and launched search and rescue operations across the affected areas. President Abelardo de la Espriella addressed the nation directly, telling Colombians they were not alone and that his government would do everything in its power to help them through what he called the most difficult moments. The president later traveled to Pereira, the capital of Risaralda, and decreed a 3-month economic relief measure for people across that coffee-growing region, saying it broke his heart to walk through the city center and see the businesses that had been destroyed. Let's talk about what typically happens next in a disaster response of this scale, because understanding the standard phases of earthquake response helps set realistic expectations for the coming days and weeks. The first phase, which is still very much underway right now, is search and rescue, generally prioritized within the first 72 hours following collapse, when survival odds for anyone trapped in structural voids are statistically highest. Though rescues beyond that window do continue to happen, particularly for those with access to air pockets and some water source. Rescue teams have been working through the night using cranes, excavators, and at times their bare hands to cut through twisted steel and clear debris in the search for survivors, while residents and volunteers have formed human chains and stood listening for tapping sounds or cries from beneath the rubble. Following the search and rescue phase, the response typically shifts toward emergency shelter and humanitarian aid distribution for displaced residents, structural assessment of damaged buildings to determine which can be repaired versus which require demolition, and eventually a longer-term reconstruction and economic recovery phase, which, given the coffee-growing economic base of this specific region, is likely to be a multi-year undertaking, given how many businesses and agricultural operations have reportedly been affected. I also want to note the elevated landslide risk that comes with an earthquake of this magnitude striking such mountainous terrain. The affected region sits within the Andes, characterized by steep slopes and, in many areas, soils already prone to instability, and strong shaking from both the main shock and the nearly 100 aftershocks recorded so far can trigger landslides on slopes that might otherwise remain stable, which adds both immediate danger to ongoing rescue operations in some areas and additional risk to communities located below unstable hillsides in the days and weeks ahead as the ground continues to settle, and as any rainfall further destabilizes already weakened terrain. For anyone watching this with connections to the affected region, I want to reiterate what's been reported about communication difficulties, since it's a recurring theme across multiple accounts coming out of this disaster. Cell networks across the affected cities have been overwhelmed or damaged, and delays in reaching loved ones do not necessarily indicate the worst outcome. They often simply reflect the state of communications infrastructure in an active disaster zone. Established relief organizations with an existing operational presence in Colombia remain the most effective channel for anyone looking to provide support from a distance. I'll continue covering this story as new information becomes available, given how quickly the reported figures have already evolved over just the past 24 to 36 hours. Subscribe to this channel for continued updates as this situation develops, and my thoughts remain with everyone across Colombia affected by this disaster.